You're not nice, you're afraid. We all want to believe we can reason with people, that if we're kind, understanding, and empathetic, things will work out. But Carl Jung warned us, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Not all transformations are positive. Some people, rather than healing you, will drain your soul. Today, we'll explore the 6 most dangerous psychological profiles Jung identified. People you must avoid if you wish to grow, individuate, and remain sane. The persona slave. There are people who no longer live. They perform. They wake up each day and put on a mask, not to protect themselves, but because they've forgotten who they are without it. This mask is what Carl Jung called the persona, the social self, the image we present to the world in order to be accepted, praised, and validated. But here's the tragedy. What begins as a necessary tool for survival becomes a prison. You begin to live for the image, not for your essence. You see it everywhere. The executive who pretends to be confident but breaks down in private. The Instagram influencer who looks perfect online but battles depression in silence. The people pleaser who sacrifices every boundary just to avoid disapproval. These are not lives. These are performances. Jung warned, the persona is a kind of mask designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual. The problem isn't the mask itself, it's identifying with it. The persona should be a tool, not your identity. The persona slave is someone who has become addicted to approval. Their self-worth is now outsourced to others. They cannot say no. They fear rejection more than self-betrayal. And eventually, they lose sight of their authentic desires, their truth, their voice. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, if you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Real authenticity requires the courage to be misunderstood, but society rewards the opposite. Polished smiles, curated virtue, scripted behavior. And so we trade freedom for applause. We become well-behaved, well-liked, and completely lost. Living this way drains the soul, because deep down, you know, this isn't you. And until you reclaim your inner voice from the performance, you will never experience true peace, only the exhausting treadmill of external validation. The moral controller. There is a type of control that doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't need to. It uses virtue as a sword and guilt as a leash. This is the moral controller. Someone who cloaks their dominance in the language of ethics, tradition, or higher principles. They never say, do what I say. They say, it's the right thing to do. They won't forbid you. They'll shame you into submission. Their power lies not in aggression, but in implication. That's what you chose to wear? You're spending time with those people? You really think that's a responsible decision? Carl Jung warned of such people when he said, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parents. Because the moral controller is often someone who has repressed their own desires, buried their contradictions, and now seeks to control others as compensation for the chaos within themselves. Instead of facing their shadow, they project it onto you. Your freedom becomes a threat to their self-image. Your independence exposes the cage they built for themselves. Real-life examples. A mother who never pursued her dreams, now guilt-tripping her daughter for being ambitious. Don't forget who sacrificed everything for you. A friend who claims moral superiority for not chasing money, yet resents your financial success. I guess money matters more to you than principles. A partner who makes you feel selfish for needing space, using love as leverage. If you really cared, you'd be here. Each interaction leaves a residue. You don't just feel misunderstood, you feel morally defective. You begin to ask yourself, am I the problem? Am I selfish for wanting joy? Is freedom a form of betrayal? As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. But with the moral controller, your mind is provoked slowly. They chip away at your sense of autonomy, not with rage, but with righteousness. Their judgment doesn't come from above. It whispers in your ear. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this clearly. Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. The moral controller fights immorality, but ends up becoming tyrannical in the name of good. And the consequence of living near such people? You shrink. You censor your thoughts before you even speak. You rehearse your words to avoid criticism. You mold yourself into someone they won't disapprove of. And in doing so, you betray your own soul. Eventually, the psychological toll becomes physical. Fatigue, tension, a constant feeling of being watched, even in solitude. But perhaps the most dangerous part is this. You begin to confuse moral control with moral clarity. You mistake their fear of life for wisdom, and you inherit their limitations as if they were virtues. To escape the moral controller, you don't need to rebel. You need to wake up. You need to reclaim your ethical compass and stop outsourcing your integrity to those who fear your growth. Because in the words of Carl Jung, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And to do that, you must silence the voice that tells you who you're allowed to be. The complexed. They don't just overreact, they resurrect ghosts. There's a kind of person whose emotional responses seem wildly disproportionate to the moment. Not because they are irrational, but because the moment is not what they're truly reacting to. They're reacting to a buried wound, to something long gone, but never healed. This is the complexed. As Carl Jung wrote, complexes are psychic fragments which have split off due to traumatic influences or certain incompatible tendencies, and they lead a kind of underground life of their own. In other words, a complex is like a sub-personality, formed from unresolved pain, and capable of hijacking your behavior. You might joke with them, and suddenly they freeze. You give them feedback, and they explode with rage. You offer affection, and they accuse you of manipulation, and you're left confused. What just happened? Real-life examples. A man raised by a cold, distant father hears your harmless sarcasm and immediately feels emasculated, not because of you, but because it echoes his childhood humiliation. A woman abandoned in childhood interprets your need for space as proof you're leaving her, even if you're just going for a walk. A friend lashes out at your success, not out of jealousy, but because your rise reminds them of how unseen they felt their entire life. To be near the complexed is to live in a landmine field. Anything, a word, a gesture, even silence can trigger an explosion. Because you're not dealing with the person in the present, you're dealing with their unprocessed past, living through them like a parasite. And here's the paradox. Sometimes they are kind, warm, insightful. Then suddenly, cold, aggressive, irrational. This intermittent affection is what hooks you. You think, they're not always like this. And that's the trap. The philosopher Simone Weil said, "Attachment is the great fabricator of illusions. Reality can be attained only by someone who is detached." But how do you detach from someone who, at moments, makes you feel more seen than anyone else? That's the cruel brilliance of the complex. It doesn't dominate all the time. It takes over in episodes, giving the illusion that the person is still in control, still redeemable, and maybe they are, but only if they are willing to do the inner work. Jung emphasized, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The complexed call it fate. They blame the world, their past, their partners, but never the phantom inside them. And if you stay close to them for too long, you begin to internalize their ghosts. You second-guess your intentions. You start walking on eggshells. You develop anxiety around innocent acts, affection, space, disagreement, because you fear the next rupture. Eventually, you become complexed too, not from your own trauma, but from absorbing theirs. So what's the way out? Not confrontation, not appeasement, but clarity. Realize you cannot heal someone else's unconscious. You can show them a mirror, but they must choose to look. And as the Stoics taught, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius. That includes the power to leave the emotional storm they refuse to end. You're not abandoning them. You're rescuing yourself from a war you didn't start. Because love isn't sacrifice without limits. It's presence with self-respect. And the greatest respect you can show yourself is knowing when it's no longer your job to fix someone else's chaos. The psychic vampire. They don't bite, they beg. Not all predators roar. Some whisper, some smile, some appear broken, and make you feel responsible for piecing them back together. This is the realm of the psychic vampire. They rarely rage. They don't control with fear, they control with need. They draw your energy not by attacking you, but by constantly requiring you. A text unanswered becomes a guilt trip. A day to yourself becomes abandonment. A moment of silence becomes punishment. And you start giving. First, your time. Then, your emotional availability. Then, your peace of mind. Carl Jung didn't use the term psychic vampire, but he described them precisely when he spoke of symbiotic relationships. When one does not become conscious of their own shadow, they project it onto others and then try to live through them. The psychic vampire lives through your attention. They exist only when seen. And so they keep demanding to be seen in subtle but constant ways. Real-life examples. A friend who always has a crisis when you're doing well, because your joy makes them feel invisible. A partner who says, "Without you, I'm nothing," not as romance, but as strategy, forcing you to carry their emotional weight. A family member who's always the victim, never responsible, never wrong, and punishes you with guilt if you step back. The result? You feel drained, but can't explain why. You start questioning your boundaries. Am I cold? You start feeling selfish for wanting space. Maybe I'm the problem. The Stoic Epictetus warned, it is not the events themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. But the psychic vampire reshapes your judgments until you believe that loving them means abandoning yourself. You are not a lifeline. You are a life. And the most radical act of compassion is sometimes to walk away, so that both of you are forced to grow. As Jung said, individuation is becoming who you truly are. You cannot do that while being devoured. The narcissistic shadow. This type uses spirituality, intellect, or success to avoid introspection. They talk of vibration, truth, or awareness, but cannot tolerate disagreement or challenge. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Spiritual narcissists weaponize knowledge to stay superior. Their shadow is massive, but they polish their ego so brightly they blind themselves. Philosophical danger. They live in self-deception. As Epictetus said, it is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. This makes them incapable of growth and hostile towards those who grow. The split self. You smile in public, but feel numb inside. You say yes when you want to say no. You live a life that looks fine on the outside, but inside, you're quietly falling apart. This is the pain of the split self, when who you are and who you pretend to be are no longer the same. Carl Jung said, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration." Take the example of a woman who always shows up for others, kind, reliable, yet feels invisible in her own life. She doesn't need praise. She needs permission to exist without the mask. As Kierkegaard put it, the most common form of despair is not being who you are. You don't need to become someone better. You need to become someone real. People with a split self often appear high-functioning. They're helpful, agreeable, even admired. But inside, there's a quiet implosion, a longing to be seen without performance, without pretense. A warning: if you stay too long in this state, your identity begins to dissolve. You forget what you believe. You doubt your intuition. You no longer ask, "What do I want?" Instead, you ask, "What would make them approve of me?" The way out. None of us is immune to these types, because we all carry seeds of them within. The only protection is awareness. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. Carl Jung. So, examine your life. Who around you fits these profiles? More importantly, when have you fit them yourself? The true journey isn't about judging others. It's about reclaiming your own sovereignty. Not by avoiding the unconscious, but by confronting it